This happened to my grandfather and I in El Salvador when I was 8 years old on a Saturday night. We were coming back from visiting relatives who lived up the mountain from us, about an hour and a half to a 2-hour hike. During the day, it's a beautiful hiking place, but at night, it's quite scary. We ended up leaving my uncle's place later than we thought, at about 8 p.m., but we were not worried since we had done this hike hundreds of times at all times of the day, but never after 10 p.m. According to locals, it's not safe to be out there after 10 p.m. because of weird things that they have seen and heard. Thankfully, we were prepared for nightfall. We had our own flashlights. Grandpa had a huge flashlight that was as bright as a headlight on a car, and our backpacks had bottles of water and snacks. Well, halfway into our way back home was pretty scary. There was no moonlight, so it was really dark, and only trees all around and a few homes here and there. We heard noises and other weird things, but since we were in the middle of the mountains, we dismissed it and kept on walking. About a mile away from home, things got very weird and spooky. We couldn't even hear a cricket sound. Everything just went silent. At this point, my grandfather grabbed me by the hand and told me to stay close. I remember getting scared and worried. I looked at my watch and it was 9:15 p.m. I told Grandpa and he said not to worry. We were almost home. I kept pointing my flashlight in front of me so I wouldn't step on something or trip over. Then, about 20 feet from us, was this huge tree and it had a bow on it, which I thought was strange, and so did my grandpa, as he replied with, "Well, that's interesting, a bow on a tree." Then to our surprise, a woman wearing a gray or light blue dress, I don't really remember, was standing on the other side of the tree, but her back to us. I told my grandpa why would she be out this time of the night all by herself. He said maybe she's lost or hurt, so we hurried to see if she needed help. We were about 10 feet away from her when she started walking, so Grandpa yells, "Hey, excuse me, miss, are you okay? Are you lost?" No answer. "Do you need help?" Again, no answer. She just kept walking. After you pass the tree with the bow, about 5 to 10 feet, you go down the hill onto an open space with a few trees here and there, and pretty flowers everywhere with a walking trail next to it. Standing on the bottom of the hill in front of the trail, Grandpa turned to me and said, "Come on, honey. We gotta hurry. I don't think she's okay." He only turned to me for about a second or two, and when we turned back, she disappeared. We couldn't find her. We looked everywhere and no luck. There was no way she could have run that fast. The trail is pretty long and little trees scattered around. Nowhere to hide even if you wanted to. Since Grandpa had a big flashlight, we had a good view of the landscape all around us, but we saw nothing. We kept walking and still looking, hoping to find her and help her, but no luck. Once we reached the town, I looked at my watch and it was 10:15 p.m. I told Grandpa how happy I was that we had made it just in time out of the mountains, yet still worried about what happened to that lady. The next day, Grandpa told a neighbor of ours the incident with the strange woman, and he interrupted my grandfather and said, "Are you talking about the big tree right before you go down the hill?" Grandpa said yes. Why? And our neighbor called his wife Susan over and began to tell us about a murder that happened in that area. On the Thursday of that week, a lady was walking home at around 8 p.m. or so when she came across a man who tried to rob her, and since she fought back, he stabbed her 4 times and she bled to death. She was found in the bottom of the hill the next morning. The killer was caught the next day drunk with a bloody shirt and a knife in his pocket. People thought he was hurt, but when they heard of the murder, they turned him in and he did confess. My grandfather turned white and I didn't know what to say at all, but feel so bad for her. The neighbor's wife, Susan, said that we were not the only ones that have seen her. A few locals have seen her walk from the tree to the bottom of the hill, where her spirit always walks back and forth. The bow on the tree was put there on her behalf. After that day, Grandpa asked if I wanted to go with him to leave flowers for her. Though I was a little scared at first, I agreed. When we were walking up the hill to the tree, Grandpa grabbed me by the hand and asked to pray for her. After leaving the flowers and sending our prayers for her, we returned home. My grandparents say that until this day, people still see her at times. I just hope that one day she's able to move on and cross over to be at peace. I was in college when I joined a mountaineering club. We planned a trip to hike a mountain that's said to be mysterious among locals in a neighboring province where my college was. There were reports of strange lights at night near the peak and sort of partying noises, despite having no power up there, but I just ignored these reports as myths. There were only 2 hiking trails that were really steep in most parts. It would really be a trouble hauling up a generator. There's also no road for vehicles. Our plan was to scale the mountain within the day. We had no plan to camp overnight. We started the trek very early in the morning so that we could reach the summit before noon and be in the clear before sundown. We only had a quick lunch up the top and began descending as soon as we were done eating and getting rest. It was fun, however. I was the only freshman and everyone else was in their senior year. My buddy was one of a trio of noisy besties, so she would walk with her friends instead of with me, and ensuring I am still with the group. I didn't complain, but it stayed that way even during the descent. I was very happy with the view, with all the scents, with a sense of being one with the wilderness. I was awed by everything, fascinated by the sounds and colors, until I realized the sound of chit-chat had grown fainter and farther. And then I realized I was being left behind. I knew I had to pick up my pace, and I thought they were just close by because I made sure I could hear them no matter where my attention was, but it wasn't enough. By then, I was panic-stricken. Even if I quickened my pace, I couldn't find them anymore. I decided to run while descending, that I stumbled, skidded, and tumbled down into a not too deep ravine, my face hitting overgrown roots of trees below. It didn't hurt, but it was quite a shock. I stood up and climbed back onto the trail. I ran again, this time trying to be more careful. I strained, but I couldn't hear them at all. I was completely alone. The sky was beginning to appear orangey. There were birds flying into the trees from somewhere. Bird calls grew louder and more diverse. The wind blew cooler air. I felt a bit scared, but I tried staying level-headed. I went through a rather wide gap between 2 high walls of red earth. It was long and wined somewhat. It was like a mini fjord without water, like a deep ramp that I can skate from one side down and up towards the other side. I was still amazed, but being gnawed with worry. Mixed feelings weren't helping, especially when the path ended in 2 forking paths going the opposite direction, although both sloping downwards. I looked, not sure which to take. Panic hit me once more, that I could not focus on the signs to check and track which path they took. I was in this kind of dilemma when at the end of one of the paths, a white dog appeared. It did not show its whole body, but it was looking at me. Then it left. I went after it. I walked on and there are more twists and turns. Every time I hesitated, the dog appeared at the end of each trail, looking at me, as if urging me to follow it. For some reason, I kept running to where it disappeared. I kept trusting its sign. This went on until I could hear my fellow hikers again. They didn't even know I was missing. I got mud all over, and they just smiled at me and went on with their lives. I could not find the dog again until we reached the foot of the mountain. I looked back, thanking the white dog in my mind who guided me out of the woods. When I was younger, about 8, I saw my first ghost. We were walking in the Appalachian Mountains, backcountry camping. I was terrified about sleeping in the woods near the top of a mountain, but my mother said we would just be fine. Animals are terrified of Daddy, my mother said with a teasing tone. Holding my mother's hand, I trusted her, but I was still nervous. We hiked up along the Appalachian Trail until my father decided it was time to settle down and set up camp. We found a nice clearing. The sun was setting. I looked up to my mother and noticed that she was pale and her hand was tightly grasping mine. "Todd, can we set up camp somewhere different?" my mother asked, still clutching my tiny hand. She was not liking the vibe the woods were giving. I sensed it too. I was afraid. My father shook his head. It's getting late. I'm not searching for firewood in the dark. I remember asking to go home. The small clearing seemed to give an ominous vibe. After hot dogs and marshmallows, we crawled into the 6-person tent my father had purchased. My father fell asleep in mere minutes, but my mother and I could not sleep. Emma, are you asleep? I lifted my head. No, Mama, I'm scared. I can't sleep. Hush, it's fine. We're safe inside the tent, she comforted. I finally fell asleep and woke up in the early hours of the morning. I came out of the tent and saw my mother sitting on the ground, meditating. She meditated every morning with a cup of Earl Grey tea. I came up to her and tapped her shoulder. Mama, can we take a walk? Mother opened her eyes and got to her feet. Sure, let's not go too far. I don't want Daddy to worry. We hiked near our campsite when my mother suddenly stopped. I followed her gaze to see a hazy image of a man leaning against a birch tree about 20 feet away. He was just a hazy image, but he did not seem threatening, just calm and solemn. He lifted his head and looked in our direction. I rubbed my eyes and he was gone. My mother just looked at me, and I understood that the man was not threatening, just calm and sad. After that, I have never seen a ghost, but I will never forget him. Never.